Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine feeling your heart stop beating, but you're still standing. Imagine looking in the mirror and seeing your reflection blink first. Now imagine discovering that somewhere in a place you've never been, someone with your exact face, your exact scars, your exact nightmares, just whispered your last words as they died. Would you feel it? Would you know? This isn't fiction. This is the documented case of the 1834 Kentucky twins, and what I'm about to tell you will make you question whether you truly know who you are, or if somewhere out there, another version of you is living a life you'll never remember. Picture this. July 1834, rural Kentucky. A blood moon hangs pregnant in the sky like a wound refusing to heal. In a cabin where the walls seem to breathe with the storm outside, Margaret Whitlow gives birth to twin boys. But here's where our story turns from miraculous to monstrous. Only one child was ever registered. Only one name appears in the county records. The other? He existed. He breathed. He cried. But according to every official document, he was never born. Yet 32 years later, two men who had never met, who lived completely separate lives, would die on the same night, at the same hour, whispering the same final words that still echo through Ashbrook County. He's coming. Think about that. Two lives, running on parallel tracks through time, never intersecting, but always synchronized. Every major event, every scar, every dream, every breath seemingly choreographed by some unseen conductor. How does this happen? How do two people live the same life twice? And more disturbing still, why did they both know they were going to die that night? Why did they both speak of someone coming? Who was coming? What was coming? These aren't just questions. They're invitations to peer into a darkness that conventional history has tried desperately to forget, but some stories refuse to stay buried, especially when the graves themselves are found empty. Let me take you back to a Kentucky that no longer exists. This wasn't the Kentucky of bourbon and bluegrass you might know. This was 1834, and if you've never truly understood what frontier means, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a place where the nearest doctor was 3 days' ride away, where wolves still howled outside your door, and where people buried their children in the backyard because the cemetery was too far and the ground too frozen. This was a Kentucky where survival meant more than just food and shelter. It meant protecting yourself from things that had no names, things that came with the fog, things that left footprints but cast no shadows. In Ashbrook County, tucked between hills that seemed to swallow sound, superstition wasn't just folklore, it was survival manual. The old women knew which herbs could break a fever and which could break a curse. They knew why you never named a baby before its first month, why you hung iron over the cradle, why you never, ever counted your children aloud. They spoke in hushed tones about birth spirits, entities that waited in the space between life and death, drawn to the moment when souls entered the world. Some midwives claimed they could see them, hovering like smoke in the corners of birthing rooms, waiting to mark certain children, waiting to claim them. And on the night of July 17th, 1834, they say every midwife in the county felt their hands go cold. Margaret Whitlow was alone that night, which should tell you everything about how wrong things were about to go. No woman chose to give birth alone in 1834, but the storm that rolled in that evening wasn't natural. Locals would talk about it for decades. Lightning that struck the same spot repeatedly, rain that fell upward, and a blood moon that seemed to pulse like a heart. Margaret's husband had ridden for the midwife hours ago but never returned. Some say his horse was found the next morning standing perfectly still in a field, eyes white with terror, refusing to move even when whipped. But Margaret couldn't wait. The twins were coming, and they were coming now. What happened in that cabin during those long hours, we only have fragments. Margaret's Bible discovered in the walls during a 1923 renovation, and the testimony of Samuel Hensley, the first neighbor to arrive the morning after. In shaking handwriting beneath the date July 17th, Margaret had written two names, Thaddeus Whitlow and something else. The second name had been scratched out so violently that it tore through 3 pages, but if you held those pages to the light, you could almost make out the letters. Almost. Samuel Hensley would later swear that when he entered the cabin, he found Margaret holding one baby while staring at an empty blanket in her other arm, cooing to it, calling it by a name he couldn't quite hear. She was talking to air, he'd tell people, but I swear to God I heard it crying back. 3 weeks, that's all Margaret Whitlow got with her children before they took her away. 21 days of neighbors peering through windows, whispering about the woman who set 2 places at the table but only had 1 baby in the house. 21 nights of her standing at the edge of the woods, calling a name that made horses rear and dogs whimper. The breaking point came when Sarah Hutchins found Margaret at dawn, kneeling in the mud beside an old split oak tree, trying to push something invisible through the crack in its trunk. "They want him back," Margaret kept saying, her fingers bloody from clawing at the bark. "But he's mine. Both of them are mine." The asylum records from Louisville State Hospital are sparse, but what's there paints a picture of a woman destroyed by something beyond postpartum psychosis. Margaret spoke of a midwife who arrived during the storm, a woman with cold hands and older eyes than her face suggested. This midwife, Margaret claimed, had delivered the first twin normally, but when the second came, she did something unnatural. She held the baby up to the blood moon visible through the window and spoke words in a language Margaret didn't recognize. Then she wrapped the infant in a black cloth and walked out into the storm. Margaret tried to follow but found herself unable to move, held to the bed by invisible hands while her newborn's cries faded into the thunder. But here's what makes investigators' skin crawl. There was no midwife registered in Ashbrook County matching Margaret's description. No one had seen this woman before or since. Yet when they searched Margaret's cabin more thoroughly, they found payment for services rendered, 2 silver coins placed on the mantel, coins that were dated 1798 but looked freshly minted, and beneath them, a receipt written in elegant script, "For services rendered, 1 delivered, 1 collected, balance paid." The signature was illegible, but the paper smelled of sulfur and sage, and anyone who handled it reported feeling inexplicably cold for hours afterward. While Margaret screamed about her stolen child in Louisville, something extraordinary was happening 40 miles away. Emma Hartley, a woman known throughout the hills as a healer and herbalist, though some whispered witch when they thought she couldn't hear, woke to the sound of crying outside her isolated farmhouse. There, on her doorstep, lay an infant wrapped in rough homespun cloth. No footprints led to or from her door, despite the mud from the recent storms. The baby was healthy, alert, and had eyes that seemed too knowing for a newborn. Emma, who had never married and claimed she preferred the company of her herbs to humans, took the child without question. She named him Emmett and told anyone who asked that he was her sister's boy from Virginia. But Emma had no sister. And the boy? He grew up calling shadows by name and drawing symbols he couldn't possibly know. Thaddeus Whitlow's childhood was carved from silence and scripture. After Margaret was taken away, the boy was delivered to the Brothers of Perpetual Atonement, a religious commune nestled in the hollow between 2 hills that locals called God's Fist. If you think modern cults are severe, you've never encountered 1830s frontier Christianity mixed with Germanic mysticism. The brothers believed that suffering purified the soul, that family bonds were earthly chains, and that certain children were born marked for either salvation or damnation. Guess which category they placed the boy whose mother had gone mad, claiming he had a twin. The commune's records, preserved in the Kentucky Historical Society, reveal a childhood that would make Dickens weep. Thaddeus was forbidden to speak of family, forbidden to ask about his origins, forbidden even to look at his own reflection. Mirrors were considered vanity, and vanity was beaten out of children with willow switches. But here's what the brothers couldn't beat out of him: the dreams. Every night, Thaddeus dreamed of another boy who shared his face. In these dreams, they would sit across from each other at a wooden table, neither speaking, just staring. The other boy's mouth would move, forming words Thaddeus couldn't hear, and Thaddeus would wake with his own lips moving in response, speaking words he didn't understand. By age 10, Thaddeus had memorized the entire Bible, could recite it forward and backward, and had begun adding his own interpretations during evening prayers. His sermons, if you could call a child's fervent whispers sermons, fixated on disturbing themes. He spoke of the flesh that remembers, of bones calling to bones across the darkness, of the hunger that God placed in us for our other half. The brothers, rather than being alarmed, saw this as divine inspiration. They encouraged his preaching, not realizing that Thaddeus wasn't speaking to God, he was speaking to someone else, someone he could feel listening just beyond the edge of consciousness. The turning point came at age 12. During a particularly violent thunderstorm, the kind that reminded old-timers of the night he was born, Thaddeus collapsed during evening prayers. His body convulsed, his eyes rolled back, and when the brothers tried to hold him down, he spoke in a voice that wasn't his own. Witnesses swore it sounded like two voices speaking in perfect unison, one his normal child's tone, the other deeper, older, angrier. "We are halved," he said. "We are hungry. We are coming together." When he woke, a red scar had appeared on his right cheek, perfectly straight, as if drawn with a burning ruler. The brothers called it stigmata, but Thaddeus knew better. Somewhere his other half had just been marked too. While Thaddeus was learning to fear God in the commune's cold halls, Emmett was learning to speak with things that had no names in Emma Hartley's herb-scented kitchen. If you've ever wondered what happens when you raise a child completely outside society's boundaries, Emmett was your answer. Emma didn't believe in rules, schedules, or the notion that children should be seen and not heard. She believed in listening to the wind, reading futures in tea leaves, and most importantly, she believed that Emmett was special, not blessed, not cursed, but something altogether different. From the moment he could walk, Emmett wasn't quite right. Not wrong exactly, but shifted a few degrees from normal. He would stand in the garden for hours, having full conversations with people Emma couldn't see. When she asked who he was talking to, he'd point to empty air and say, "The boy who looks like me but sadder." He knew things he shouldn't, when storms were coming days in advance, which herbs would cure ailments he'd never seen, where to find lost things by closing his eyes and walking until he stopped. The local farmers started bringing their sick animals to him when he was just 7. He would place his small hands on them, whisper words that sounded like prayers played backward, and more often than not, the animals recovered. But it was the bones that truly set him apart. Emmett was fascinated by what lay beneath skin, the architecture of living things. He could feel breaks in bones through flesh, could tell you where an animal had been injured years ago just by running his fingers along its spine. Emma, rather than discouraging this, taught him anatomy from her collection of medical texts, books that weren't exactly legal for a woman to own in 1840s Kentucky. By age 10, Emmett could set bones, stitch wounds, and perform minor surgeries that grown doctors would struggle with. But here's what made people whisper "witch boy" when they saw him. He always knew exactly where to cut, exactly where to heal, as if something was guiding his hands. Then came his 12th birthday, July 17th, 1846. Emma found him that morning standing in front of her one cracked mirror, the only one in the house, tracing his finger along his right cheek. "It's going to hurt," he said calmly, and before Emma could ask what he meant, he turned and walked straight through the kitchen window, the glass shattered, one perfect shard catching his cheek and leaving a straight, deep cut from his eye to his jaw. As Emma rushed to help him, Emmett just smiled through the blood. "Now we match," he said. "Now he'll know I'm real too." That night, for the first time in his life, Emmett had a seizure. When he woke, he asked Emma for paper and began writing in handwriting that wasn't his own, filling page after page with Latin phrases he'd never learned. The same phrases investigators would later discover that Thaddeus was writing in his journal 40 miles away. If you've ever stood between two mirrors and seen your reflection stretch into infinity, you'll understand the vertigo of comparing Thaddeus and Emmett's lives. These weren't just similarities. These were synchronicities that defied probability, mathematics, and sanity. Let me lay out the facts that investigators spent decades trying to explain away and failed. Both boys lost their first tooth on September 3rd, 1841. Thaddeus during morning prayers when he bit down on a piece of hard bread, Emmett while chewing willow bark for a fever patient. Both teeth were upper left canines. Both boys kept the teeth, wrapping them in cloth and hiding them without telling anyone. At age 14, both began journals on the exact same day, March 15, 1848, using identical leather-bound books they'd received as gifts from people who swore they'd chosen them randomly. The handwriting in these journals, forensic analysts in the 1990s couldn't tell them apart. Not similar, identical. Every loop, every curve, every hesitation in the pen strokes matched perfectly. But it goes deeper than physical coincidences. Both men developed an obsession with duality, with things that existed in pairs. Thaddeus preached about the twin nature of sin and salvation, about how every soul was split between heaven and hell. His sermons grew so intense that even the Brothers of Perpetual Atonement, not exactly known for their moderation, asked him to soften his message. He refused. Instead, he began conducting services in abandoned churches, drawing followers who were attracted to his talk of reunification of the severed self and the hunger that gnaws at half a soul. Meanwhile, Emmett was developing his own following among the hill people, those who needed healing but couldn't afford doctors. He never asked for payment but required something else, a drop of the patient's blood, which he would mix with his own and burn while whispering what he called joining words. The most disturbing parallel: their dreams. Both men documented the same recurring nightmare. A room with two doors, one black, one white. They stood at opposite doors, unable to enter, watching each other through the empty space. In the center of the room lay a woman they both recognized but had never seen. Their mother, Margaret, young and whole, holding two infants. But in the dream, she would look at them with terror and slowly tear one baby in half, the sound of ripping flesh echoing until they woke. They drew this dream, both of them, and the drawings matched down to the pattern on Margaret's dress, a dress that was buried with her in the asylum cemetery, unseen by either man. By 1865, both men were legends in their own communities. Thaddeus, now calling himself Prophet of the Severed, led midnight congregations where followers claimed to see double shadows cast by single candles. Emmett, known as the Bone Mender, was said to heal breaks by calling the separated pieces back together with words that hurt to hear. Neither man ever married, both claiming they were already joined to another. Neither man ever traveled more than 50 miles from where they were raised, and yet, on the night of July 16, 1866, both men told their respective followers the same thing: "Tomorrow I go to meet my brother. Tomorrow we become whole." July 17, 1866, 32 years to the day after the blood moon birth. If you believe in coincidences, this is where your faith gets tested. If you don't, this is where your nightmares begin. Let me tell you about two deaths that happened simultaneously, 43 miles apart, in ways that still make forensic experts close their files and pour themselves a drink. Emmett woke that morning calm as a lake before lightning strikes. Emma Hartley, now in her 70s, would later testify that he spent the dawn hours arranging his possessions with methodical precision, his surgical tools laid out in order of size, his collected blood vials, yes, he'd kept every drop from every patient, arranged in a perfect circle, his journal open to a fresh page where he'd written just one line. The other voice is quiet now. He kissed Emma's forehead, told her she'd been the mother the moon allowed him to have, and walked out into the field behind her farm. He lay down beneath the same split oak where Margaret had once tried to push her invisible baby, crossed his arms over his chest, and closed his eyes. A neighbor checking his cattle at 8:47 p.m. saw a flash of light around the tree. Not lightning, he swore, but light that seemed to come from the ground up. When he reached Emmett, the young man was dead. No wounds, no signs of distress, just gone, with a smile on his face that the undertaker couldn't remove. At that exact moment, in an abandoned church 43 miles away, Thaddeus was delivering his final sermon to 17 followers. The topic? The reunion of the divided. Witnesses described him as electric that night, his voice carrying impossible echoes, his shadow seeming to move independently on the wall behind him. At 8:47 p.m., mid-sentence, he stopped. His eyes went wide, and he spoke in what survivors swore were two distinct voices layered together. "I am no longer or alone." Then the windows, every single one, exploded inward. Not outward, as from pressure inside, but inward, as if something massive had pushed from outside. When the glass settled and the screaming stopped, Thaddeus lay at the pulpit, arms crossed over his chest in the exact same position as Emmett, wearing the exact same smile. But here's what turns coincidence into impossibility. Both men's final journal entries, written hours before their deaths, contained the same message. Not similar. Identical. Word for word, punctuation for punctuation. Tonight the door opens. Tonight the halves become whole. He comes to collect what was divided, to join what was severed. I go willingly to my other self. We were never meant to live apart. Mother, forgive us for being born broken. The handwriting analysis confirmed what everyone already knew. It was the same hand writing in two places at once, and at the bottom of both entries, a symbol neither man had ever drawn before, two circles, overlapping, with a third circle encompassing both. Investigators would later find this same symbol carved into Margaret's cell wall at the asylum, dated the night she died, July 17th, 1850. Exactly 16 years before her son's. In 1996, Dr. Sarah Chen thought she was going to solve a historical curiosity. A geneticist from Johns Hopkins with a side interest in folklore, she'd assembled a team to put the Kentucky twins mystery to rest once and for all. DNA testing had advanced enough that even degraded samples could yield results. The graves were documented. The hair samples from both men's personal effects had been preserved in separate private collections. This should have been straightforward. Instead, Dr. Chen's team uncovered something that made her request all their findings be sealed for 20 years. The exhumation permits were granted on a cold October morning. The team included forensic archaeologists, a molecular biologist, 2 historians, and, at the insistence of Ashbrook County officials, a local priest. What they found in Thaddeus's grave made them immediately call for a second team. The casket was intact, expensive for its time, but inside, no body, no bones, not even the phosphorus traces that remain when bodies completely decompose. Instead, they found his burial suit, laid out as if on an invisible form, torn to shreds from the inside out. The fabric showed stress patterns consistent with explosive force, but there were no burn marks, no chemical residues, just empty clothes that had been destroyed by something trying to get out. Emmett's grave, 43 miles away, told the same impossible story. Same intact casket, same shredded clothes, same absence of any human remains. But this time they found something else. Pressed between the wooden boards were what looked like fingerprints, burned into the wood. The prints were tested and matched both men's documented prints from their personal effects. Both sets, on both coffins, as if each man had touched the inside of both graves. The wood was carbon dated to confirm it was original 1866 lumber. The prints were fresh enough. That the oils were still detectable. The DNA results from the hair samples broke 3 machines before yielding readable data. The mitochondrial DNA was identical, expected for twins, but the nuclear DNA showed impossible mutations. Sequences that repeated in patterns geneticists had never seen. Markers that suggested not natural birth but something closer to. Dr. Chen's report used the word duplication before crossing it out and writing anomaly. But here's what her sealed report actually said. The DNA showed signs of artificial separation, as if one genetic template had been forcibly split and forced to develop as two entities, the kind of manipulation we can barely achieve today with advanced CRISPR technology. In 1834, this was impossibility squared. The team's final discovery came from soil analysis around the graves. In both locations, they found trace elements that didn't belong, minerals consistent with extreme electromagnetic events, crystallized sand suggesting temperatures over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and most disturbing, organic compounds that matched human neural tissue but showed signs of quantum entanglement. 2 brains worth of tissue, scattered across 2 sites, still showing paired quantum states after 130 years. Dr. Chen's final note, scribbled in the margin of her official report. They didn't die. They merged. God help us, they went home. Drive through Ashbrook County today and you'll notice what's missing before you see what's there. No historical markers for the twins, no tourist stops at the grave sites, no mention in the local museum. But pay attention to the details. The way conversations stop when outsiders mention July 17th. The fresh flowers that appear on 2 unmarked hills every year without fail. The fact that the local hospital's maternity ward has no room 17 and never schedules induced births on the 17th of any month. This isn't forgetting. This is active remembering disguised as silence. I spoke with Mary Hensley, whose great-great-grandfather was the Samuel who found Margaret that morning in 1834. She agreed to talk only after I promised not to use her real name or photograph her face. Every family in this county has a story, she told me, pouring coffee with hands that shook despite her firm voice. My grandmother saw them in 1953, clear as day, walking down Main Street, both of them, young as when they died. She said they looked lost, like they were searching for something. When she blinked, only one remained, but he had tears on both sides of his face. Mary's not alone. The local police have a file, unofficial of course, documenting twin sightings going back decades. Always the same. 2 identical men in period clothing, visible for moments before becoming one, then none. The annual ritual is the worst kept secret in town. Every July 17th at 8:47 p.m., locals light 2 candles in their windows. Not everyone, maybe half the town, but enough that the county glows with paired lights. They'll tell you it's a tradition, but press harder and the truth emerges. It's protection. You light 2 so they know they're remembered, explained Tom, a bartender who asked me not to use his last name. You light 2 so they don't come looking for what they're missing. What are they? Missing? No one will say directly, but the implications chill. Themselves, each other, or perhaps the wholeness that was stolen the night they were born. But it's the children's experiences that truly disturb. In 2008, a local teacher reported that her entire 3rd grade class had drawn the same picture during free art time. 2 boys standing on opposite sides of a tree, reaching through it toward each other. None of the children had heard the twin story. It's deliberately not taught in schools. When asked why they drew it, each child gave the same answer. The boys in the playground told us to. The playground was empty that day. It had been closed for maintenance. In 2015, twin sisters born at the county hospital claimed until age 5 that they had 2 other brothers who visited them at night, teaching them songs in a language their parents didn't recognize. The songs, when phonetically transcribed, contained Latin phrases, matching entries in both Thaddeus and Emmett's journals. The most recent incident made the local paper, though disguised as a gas leak evacuation. June 2023, the Ashbrook County Library discovered that every book containing genealogical records from 1834 had been found open to the same page, the birth records for July. The security footage showed the books opening by themselves, pages turning without wind or hand, stopping at the same entry. Margaret Whitlow, son born. Singular, son, not sons, but in the margin, appearing in fresh ink that tests confirmed was from the 1830s. Someone had written, "Error. We were both here. We are both here. We will be whole again." So here we are. you and I, standing at the edge of a mystery that swallows every attempt at explanation. After everything you've heard, the synchronized lives, the empty graves, the DNA that shouldn't exist, the town that lights candles against something they won't name, what are we left with? Not answers, never answers, only questions that multiply like cells dividing, each one spawning two more, until you're drowning in possibilities that make your skin crawl. Was Margaret Whitlow visited by something inhuman that night in 1834? Did she make a bargain, trading one son for the other's survival? Or did something else, something that feeds on human souls, see an opportunity in those twins and split them apart for purposes we can't fathom? Consider this. Every culture has myths about twins, about souls divided, about the danger of being born too similar to another. What if those aren't myths? What if they're warnings? What if Thaddeus and Emmett were just one instance of something that happens more often than we know, but rarely leaves such clear evidence? The scientific impossibilities pile up like bodies. DNA that shows artificial manipulation in 1834, quantum entanglement in human tissue that persists after death, two men writing identical words at the same moment 40 miles apart, empty graves with burned handprints. These aren't ghost stories. These are documented facts that make physicists close their eyes and recalculate, hoping the numbers will make sense the second time. They never do. Because what happened to the Kentucky twins exists in the space between what we know and what we fear, that consciousness isn't confined to one body, that death isn't an ending, that somewhere in the quantum foam of possibility, we all have doubles living lives we'll never remember but always feel. But here's what keeps me awake at night, and what should keep you awake too. Oh, the twins knew. Both of them, their entire lives knew they were incomplete. They felt their other half like phantom limb pain in reverse, not missing something they'd lost, but aching for something that was kept just out of reach. Every prayer Thaddeus spoke, every bone Emmett healed, was an attempt to bridge that gap. And on July 17th, 1866, something answered. Something came to collect. Something made them whole. The question that should terrify you isn't what happened to them, it's whether it's happening to you. Right now, as you listen to this, pay attention to your body, that random pain in your side. Did you cause it, or did someone else somewhere else just get injured? That dream you keep having about a room you've never seen, is it imagination or memory from eyes that aren't yours? That person you passed on the street who looked familiar but wrong, was it déjà vu, or did you just miss meeting yourself? The Kentucky twins prove one thing beyond doubt: we don't know the rules of existence. We don't know if we're whole or halved, original or echo, alone or shadowed by doubles. We'll never meet until the night something comes to collect. So I leave you with this, the same question that Mary Hensley asked me before I left Ashbrook County, the same question written in the margins of both twins' journals, the same question Margaret Whitlow screamed in the asylum until her voice gave out. If you found your other half, the part of you that was torn away before memory began, would you recognize them? Would you run toward them or away? And when the collector comes, because something always comes for divided things, will you choose to remain split, or will you pay the price to become whole? Look in the mirror tonight. Look carefully. And if your reflection moves first, even for a second, remember the Kentucky twins. Remember that some divisions are meant to protect us, and remember that somewhere, in a county that prefers silence to truth, people still light 2 candles every July 17th, not in memory, but in warning. Because Thaddeus and Emmett found each other, they became whole, and nobody knows what they became after that. Sweet dreams, if you can manage them. Did this story leave you with chills that won't fade? Good. That means you're paying attention. Share this with someone who needs to question reality tonight. Subscribe if you want more mysteries that history tried to bury, and comment below. Have you ever felt like part of you was missing? Have you ever wondered if somewhere another you is living a parallel life? Because after researching the Kentucky twins, I've learned one thing: the impossible happens more often than we admit. We just choose not to see it. Until next time, keep your candles lit. Both of them.